We went from them to you.
Welcome to what promises to be a very rich evening with our special guests from Roots. I'm Ryan Curry. I serve as the Canon for Common Mission on the diocesan staff of the Diocese of South Carolina. So glad to see those of you who are here. I will now turn it over to the Dean of Grace Church Cathedral, the Reverend Michael Wright.
Welcome. Thank you for honoring us with your presence this day. It is our joy to be able to host such a special event, and we're looking forward to all that this evening presents us with. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. It's not by accident we're right next to the College of Charleston, where learning and growing is at the heart of our identity, and we like to enter into that identity, and today allows us to do some more of just that, entering and learning and growing with guests like you helping us along the way. So welcome. I'm going to call on Adam Shoemaker to formally introduce our guests.
Good evening. My name is Adam Shoemaker, and I'm the rector at St. Stephen's, just a few blocks away on Anson Street. For those who don't know me, I have a multi-faith and multi-ethnic family background that encompasses the three great Abrahamic faith traditions. I am the child of American and Egyptian parents, so I have a very large Muslim family in Egypt. I also have Sephardic Jewish roots on the other side of my family, and some Episcopalians too. And I am recently returned from a wonderful sabbatical, a wonderful time away when I had an occasion to do some genealogical research on the Jewish side of my family, as well as to travel to Egypt to spend time with my very large family there that includes 6 half-brothers and sisters. And so I'm very personally interested in this event and in our speakers. Thank you so very much for being here. And it is my honor to introduce them at a time, obviously, when the conflict in the Middle East continues, but also amid conflicted and polarized times right here in the United States that include alarming rises in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So it's so very important that we make these spaces and have these dialogues. We are honored this evening to welcome 2 representatives of the organization Roots, Shorashim, Judur, who make their home in the West Bank, Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger and Mr. Noor Awad. Roots is a unique network of local Palestinians and Israelis who have come to see each other as partners in making changes to end conflict between their peoples. Based on mutual recognition of each people's national identity and connection to the land, Roots is challenging the assumptions that their member communities hold about each other, building trust and creating a new discourse around the conflict in their respective societies. Roots Shorashim Judur has created and operates the only joint Israeli-Palestinian community center in the entire West Bank, Judea and Samaria. This safe, holy space hosts social, religious, and educational activities, bringing together hundreds of Palestinians and Israelis who begin to realize that there are 2 truths, 2 stories, not one, in this land. That the only way forward is to cherish both. At Roots, local people learn to take responsibility for making change. Where there seems to be no hope, hope is born anew. From the bottom up, they have created a model for a better future. Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger lives in Alon, Shavot, Israel, and is one of the founders of Roots Shorashim Judur, the Palestinian-Israeli grassroots initiative for understanding, nonviolence, and transformation. Currently, he serves as its Director of International Relations. He is also the founder of the American Friends of Roots, a multi-faith organization dedicated to supporting the work of Roots Shorashim Judur. Rav Hanan frequently speaks in the United States, together with one of his Palestinian partners, about the amazing work of this organization. Prior to the founding of Roots, Rav Hanan spent his whole career teaching Jewish studies in various seminaries, colleges, and frameworks in the Jerusalem area, among them the Pardes Institute, Bet Midrash Elul, Nishmat, and Yeshivat Bat Ayin. Sorry if I pronounced any of that correctly. He also spent 2 years as part of the Judaic Fellows Program in Boca Raton, Florida, and over 10 years in Dallas, Texas. First as Rosh Kollel of the Community Kollel, and later as founder and executive director and community rabbinic scholar for the Jewish Studies Initiative of North Texas. He and his Israeli-born wife, Ayala, have 4 grown children and 11 grandchildren. Bless you. Noor Awad, born to Palestinian parents, Noor and his family moved from Amman, Jordan, to Beit Sahor following the signing of the Oslo Accords. There he began engaging with his identity as a Palestinian refugee, both in violent and non-violent ways. While studying to become a tour guide, Noor traveled to Israel and for the first time saw Israelis beyond the lens of occupying soldiers, which put him on a path of intense rethinking about the reality of the conflict. In 2012, Noor was licensed by the Palestinian Ministry of Tourism. In 2016, Noor was asked to bring an overseas group he was guiding to hear Rabbi Schlesinger speak at Roots. He was profoundly challenged by what he heard. And after a series of intense, mind-expanding meetings with the rabbi and later with Ali Abu Awad, in which he heard things he had never heard before, Noor became a Roots activist. Later, Noor became the Palestinian English language Roots spokesperson, in which capacity he has spoken to thousands of overseas visitors and given them an incisive, honest, and introspective perspective on Palestinian identity and experience, on the conflict, and on Roots' role within it in the arduous journey towards a solution. Today, Noor is a member of the leadership team of Roots. Noor resides in Bethlehem, where, when he's not working with Roots, he guides English speakers on geopolitical tours of the region. Again, we are so very grateful to have our speakers this evening, grateful for Grace for hosting this event. And before we begin, I believe our bishop would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Adam. Again, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. This past summer, our family had the gift of being in the Holy Land for the wedding of dear friend's daughter. And our friends set up 5 days of amazing touring. It was our first time to be there. And included in those 5 days was an afternoon at Roots. And of all of the holy things we experienced, undoubtedly our time at Roots was the holiest. I believe that what Roots is doing is the hope. Certainly the hope in the Middle East and the hope in this present conflict, but it is far beyond that, a model that offers hope for us in such a polarized, divided, and violent world. And so I am so thankful that you all agreed to add this time and this evening with us, and we are eager to hear what you have to share with us. And I also want to note that we have friends, we are live streaming, and we have friends from across the diocese and beyond who you don't see in this room, but are with us virtually. So we're glad that they are with us too. So with that said, welcome again and thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Let's get on a plane together. We're going to repeat what you experienced just a few months ago. We're traveling to the Holy Land as a group, and after a flight of about 12 hours, I think, we debark in Ben Gurion Airport in the state of Israel, go through customs, they put us on a bus, and we travel east towards Jerusalem, but also bearing south. Perhaps you don't know exactly where we're going. And at a certain point, we pass a checkpoint. We're told that we're now entering the West Bank. The soldiers look at the bus and wave us through. They don't check it. The scenery begins to change. We see Palestinian villages on the left and the right. There's Jabba on one side, Suif on the other side. The incline gets steeper and steeper. We find ourselves at the top of the mountain, and there's a plateau. We're in the center of the Gush Etzion Jewish settlements. We see Kibbutz Kfar Etzion, Alon Shtut, where I live. Oh, why don't we put the map? Oh, we have the map. Very good. And we're right there between Bethlehem and Hebron. We see a big shopping center. At a certain point, the bus turns off the roads and is now traveling on a dirt path. It's bumpy and it's muddy. After about a 5-minute slow drive on the dirt road, we get off the bus and we enter into the gate of what looks like a Palestinian farmstead. There's a metal gate. There's a stone fence around the compound. We walk inside. We see some animals and bathrooms, classrooms, offices. We sit down in the classroom, as I guess you did during the summer. And now I want to give some background to where we're sitting in this classroom in this Palestinian farmstead. You see, in the West Bank where we are right now, Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs live very, very close to each other, but very far away. Geographically, almost one on top of the other, but in every other sense, they're worlds apart. Different languages the two sides speak, and different cultures, different religions, of course. In addition, the two sides have different economic systems. They shop in different places and mostly work completely in different places. The educational systems are separate. That means preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, up to university. The West Bank is completely separate. Palestinian Arabs here and Israeli Jews here, even though they're living right next to each other. The transportation systems are also separate. That means the buses and taxis, completely separate. Now, the Israelis and the Palestinians sometimes drive on the same roads, but we have different color license plates that distinguish between the two sides. The health systems are completely separate, whether it's the doctor, the dentist, the clinic, the hospital, in the West Bank, completely separate. You'll never meet someone from the other side in the waiting room of the doctor. I'm not finished though. We have different calendars. That means when people go to work, what days of the week, and when the kids have vacation from school, completely different. It goes so far that sometimes the two sides, even though they may be walking on the same road, have different times on their watches. Because the Palestinians and the Israelis sometimes switch to and from daylight savings time, different days, different weeks. It once happened, different months. And we live under different legal systems. I'm an Israeli citizen. I have full civil and political rights. And down the block, a 5-minute drive, is a little Palestinian hamlet where the people are citizens of no country, with no civil and political rights. And here we are living in the little strip of land together. So what happens, and you know the answer to my question, I'm sure, what happens when two enemies are living right next to each other with no contact? What happens is ignorance of the other side. Bigotry, stereotypes, what in America is called racism, and lots of resentment and hate and fear. Fear, by the way, kills. People kill and people are killed because they're afraid of what the other side will do to me or is doing to me. So fear kills. And it's actually even worse than everything I just said. There's no common ground, and I don't mean those words common ground as a metaphor. I mean literally ground. real estate, the earth, Israeli military law that governs the life of Israelis and Palestinians there in the West Bank states explicitly that Israelis are not allowed in Israelis are not allowed in Palestinian villages, towns, cities, residential areas, not at all, ever. And Palestinians are not allowed in Israeli towns and cities and villages except if they're menial workers under armed guard with a work permit during work hours. Which means that had there been a strange Israeli, let's say like me, and a strange Palestinian, let's say like Noor, who wanted to have a cup of coffee together, there's no place to do it. No place to do it. And that was completely true until 10 years ago when we created the place you're sitting right now. So the place you're sitting right now is called Merkaz Karama. Merkaz is a Hebrew word that means center, and Karam is the Arabic word for dignity. The Dignity Center is the only shared ground between Israelis and Palestinians in the whole West Bank. It's the only community center that brings together the two sides. Now, what happens there in Merkaz Karam, the Dignity Center, what happens is pretty similar to what happens to any community center around the world. There's activities, there's social activities, there's religious activities, there's interfaith dialogue, a great emphasis on interfaith dialogue. There's some sports activities, there's a group for little kids, there's a high school youth movement. Everything is the two sides together. There's women's playback, there's a women's storytelling group, there are photography workshops, there's discussions, learning about the culture and the religion of the other side, there's political discussions. What happens when the two sides come together for the first time is this. You can see Palestinians on this side of the room and Israelis on this side of the room. And I've literally seen someone nudging his friend, why don't you bring me here? Look at them, they're gonna kill me. People are really afraid when they come the first time. But it doesn't take that long to begin the process of humanization. And I have to tell you, that process is necessary because we're not aware of it, but we really don't see the other side as completely human. They're monsters. That's the experience that we have, and that's what we're taught. And I would say that many people are surprised to discover that they're just like us. It doesn't matter if it's this side or that side. They're just like us, and you can talk to them. And they're a little bit embarrassed that we're surprised, but we're still surprised. This process of humanization, essential as it is not the most difficult and the most important thing we do. It takes one session, perhaps two, perhaps three, and it's already clear to you that they're human beings and all the things they told me about them, it's just not true. But then comes the hard work, which is coming face to face with the fact that that human being from the other side that I just met is the bearer of a national, historic, political consciousness that completely contradicts mine. And what I mean by that is that Palestinian woman, let's say, that I just met on the other side of the room, what she knows about herself contradicts what I think I know about her. And what she thinks she knows about me contradicts what I know about myself. Worlds clash, and to come face to face with the fact that they bear an identity that I have no idea about, and there's some truth in their identity, no matter which side we're talking about, that's really, really difficult. And to try and give a name to this, listen to this. I claim, and you can throw rotten eggs at me if you want, that most Israelis and most Palestinians, and I would say since October 7th, just about all Israelis and all Palestinians are sick in the heart. And I have a name for this sickness. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist. I call it the hubris of exclusivity. The hubris of exclusivity. And it's a virus that courses through our veins and comes right into the heart, and it convinces us that the other side is not real. The other side is not legitimate. The other side doesn't belong in this land, only I belong. And what happens in the work of Roots at the Dignity Center, not always, and not completely and not immediately for certain, is a slow process of healing, in which I begin to come to terms with the fact that, wow, their identity is real. It's true. They are who they say they are. This process of healing is very, very challenging, extremely difficult. So after saying all that, you know where you're sitting. And I'll just add what you already know, that the Dignity Center is run by Roots, Shorashim, Judur, Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. We formed 10 years and about a month and a half ago. So, my name is Hanan Schlesinger, as you heard. Now I'll introduce myself. 3 things: Jew, Zionist, settler. When I say I'm a Jew, I'm not talking about religion. I'm a religious Jew, but the substratum there is Jew. I'm talking about Jewish peoplehood, not religion. We mean by that the Jewish people were born, the children of Abraham and Sarah, Genesis chapter 12, they had children, the children had children. We became an extended family and then a clan and a tribe, the 12 tribes of Israel, and all Jews today see themselves as descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel in some sense or another. We have a common destiny, a sense of shared faith that we're going through this earth, this world together for 3,000 years. And one of the central elements of Jewish identity is the knowledge that there's a unique connection between the people of Israel and the land of Israel. Because we're not just a religion, not just a faith, we are something like a nation, a people is the word I use. We are connected to land, where we began, our history began, and then someday we'll be going back. And now, because of that connection between the people of Israel and the land of Israel, I can, from my perspective, move seamlessly from talking about myself as a Jew to talking about myself as a Zionist. Because for me, Zionism is nothing more than the next stage, the consummation of the fullness of Jewish identity. Zionism is a political movement created about 150 years ago to return the Jewish people home. What do I mean home? I mean that in the year 70 of the Common Era, only a few decades after the death of Jesus, the Roman Empire made war against the Jews, or perhaps it's better to say the Jews made war against the Romans. We revolted and we failed. And in the aftermath of this great revolt, many of my ancestors were killed by the Romans, and those who were left were exiled to the Middle East, to Northern Africa. Later, we made our way to Italy and Europe and to Australia and to America. And throughout these 2,000 years of exile, diaspora, the Jewish people have had a sense that we're not where we're supposed to be. We're in limbo, we're waiting, and we're hoping, and we're praying, and we're crying, the Shana Haba Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And the Zionist movement said, enough to cry, enough to pray, now let's make it happen through a political movement. And of the 3 million and more Jews from around the world that were brought home through the Zionist movement, one of them is me. I was born in New York. When I was 18, on my own, I left home and I got on the plane, and Hebrew would say, Asiti Aliyah. I made the ascent, which means that I came home and I had a sense of closing the circle and fulfilling the dreams of my great grandfather and grandmother. After I said I'm a Jew and I said I'm a Zionist, I said I'm a settler, which means that I am an Israeli Jew with Israeli citizenship, but I do not live in the boundaries of the state of Israel, the orange here. I crossed over the dotted line, which is the green line, we call it, into the West Bank. That's the area that's in blue or light blue gray. And I've been living there now for over 40 years, much over 40 years. And I know that when I say I'm a settler, and when I say I live where I live in the West Bank, it may sound to many people that I'm making a political statement, even a radical, dangerous, extremist political statement. And I get that. But I want to emphasize that my primary self-understanding is not the political statement, it's the historical statement. What do I mean I'm making a historical statement by living where I live? Here it is. I mentioned a few minutes ago, chapter 12 in the book of Genesis. Chapter 12 takes place in the West Bank. And the next chapter, the next chapter, the next chapter, most of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, are either about moving towards the West Bank or living in the West Bank. The book of Joshua is all about the West Bank. The book of Judges is all about the West Bank. The book of Kings is all about the West Bank. And most of the prophets lived in the West Bank. You had never heard that before, I assume. So Jewish history is in the West Bank. During the 1,000 years when the Jewish people lived in the land, we almost never made it to the coastal cities of Ashdod, Ashkelon, Tel Aviv, Netanya. Now that's certainly part of the promised land, part of the land of Israel. It's part of the state of Israel today, the coastal city. That's where most of these citizens of Israel live, on the coast. But historically, we have our roots, we have our literature, we have our history, we have our archaeology in what we today call the West Bank. That's why I live there, because of that historical continuity, that chain of tradition. There are so many places in the West Bank where you can walk and scratch the ground with your heel and come up with potsherds that our ancestors left 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. And those potsherds speak to me. They say there's historical continuity here. You're part of us. We're part of you. We're together in a chain of tradition. And perhaps you know that in Israel, many people study Bible, but not just in the classroom. You put the Bible in the backpack, you get on the bus, you travel to the West Bank, you open up the Bible, and you walk in the footsteps of what you're reading, whether it's Abraham and Sarah, whether it's Joshua, whether it's King David. It's all alive, and we feel we're part of it. And for the same reason that I live there, historical continuity, I usually don't call it the West Bank, I call it Judea and Samaria. And I know that also sounds like it has, for some people, terrible political connotations. But I call it Judea and Samaria not for the politics, but rather, again, for the history. I call it Judea and Samaria because that's what the Jewish people have called it for the past 2,500 years. Right? In the book of Kings, you know that there was a kingdom above Jerusalem to the north, and it was called Israel, and its capital was in Samaria, the city of Samaria, and the whole kingdom got the name of Samaria. And below Jerusalem to the south, where I live, was the kingdom of Judea. So I call it what I call it for the same reason I live there, because of the sense of historical belonging. And it's very, very powerful. But then, a little bit more than 10 years ago, I began to realize that in a certain sense, I don't really know what I'm talking about. And I don't mean that everything I said until now was a lie. But I do mean that everything I said until now is only a half-truth. And it was a half-truth that for my whole life I thought was the whole truth. Because until 10 years ago, I'd never met a Palestinian. Even though they are 85% of the population where I live. But I'd never met a Palestinian. It's not just I never met one. It's that they didn't exist for me, like they don't exist for all my neighbors. We, Jews in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, are blind to the existence of other people. For me, the Palestinians were like the gray drab scenery that passes in the background of the movie, but is not part of the plot. You can ignore it, it's not important. They're transparent. I've learned over the past 10 years that just like the Jewish people have a glorious story in the land, the Palestinians also have a glorious story in the land. And I've learned that my presence there is true and legitimate, and their presence there is also true and legitimate. Today, I hope that I know and I live that there are two stories in the land. And I believe that if you mistake half of the truth, one of the stories, for the whole truth, then you're very close to falsehood, and that's not a place that I want to be any longer. So now I have to tell you how this happened to me. So I'm driving my car 10 years and 2 months ago, around where I live, between Bethlehem and Hebron. I had in the car 2 evangelical pastors from the States. They were friends of mine from the days that I was a rabbi in Dallas, Texas. And they believe, of course, the same Bible that we Jews believe in. They know Isaiah, they know Jeremiah, they know Ezekiel. And they read the prophecies that someday, after a long, hard exile, the descendants of the Israelites would come home. And they understood, like I believe, that is happening today, that the prophecies are being fulfilled through the Zionist movement. And they wanted me to show them the return of the exiles. With great pride, I drove them around. We saw the roads we paved and the forests we planted and the many, many buildings and institutions that we've constructed. And as we're driving, I picked up a hitchhiker. And then I saw another hitchhiker standing on the side of the road. I picked him up as well. We drove a short while. The two young men, the hitchhikers, asked to get out of the car. I stopped. I got out. We started to drive again. And when we began to drive again, one of the pastors, his name is Bob Roberts from Dallas, Texas, Bob said the following words. He said, Hanan, you just taught us a lesson in Jewish ethics. That was beautiful. You picked up hitchhikers. No one does that in Texas. So I said to Bob, it's not just me around here. We all pick up hitchhikers because we have a common vision. We trust each other. And just like everyone else, I do my best to pick up every person who puts out his finger for a ride. And by the time I finished that sentence, I realized that I was lying. I was lying to Bob and Kevin, and even worse, I was lying to myself. I said and I believed deeply at that point that I pick up every person. But it dawned on me that it's not true. I pick up everyone together. I pick up only Jews. I never picked up a Palestinian in my life, but I literally did not know that there was someone that I hadn't picked up. Now there's Palestinians walking on the side of the road all the time. I didn't see them. And as Bob and Kevin and I began to discuss what I just said and what I was experiencing concerning myself, it was clear that there was something wrong with me. I don't see the Palestinians as human beings. And I have to do something about that. And I took upon myself in that car ride to fix it. And fix it means find a way to turn the Palestinians into human beings. My eyes, what I have to do is meet them. So I began this journey to meet them. And by the way, Myron Yeshua, who you met, was the person who first took me to meet my first Palestinian. But I'm going to tell now a different story. Might be the second or third time. So I had a map in hand of where I'm supposed to go to meet a number of Palestinians. Excuse me. Sorry. It's the last Wednesday of January 2014, and I get up from the sofa I'm sitting on in my living room. I walk to the front door, open the door, begin to walk out, and my wife calls behind me, "Where are you going?" So I'm going to meet Palestinians, and that's when all hell broke loose. So she starts to cry. I start crying. She starts, not yet, she didn't cry, she started to scream. And I came back in, and I approached my wife, and I saw the terror in her eyes. She begged me not to go, really. But I knew how to do this. I walked out the front door, and I remember that when I closed the door behind me, I said to myself, perhaps they will kill me, perhaps she's right. And my heart is pounding. I begin to walk. I didn't take the car. It was supposed to be about a 20-minute walk. And I came into that gate that you guys came into just half an hour ago when you got off the bus. I walked into that Palestinian farmland. There was no classroom there, no bathrooms, and almost nothing. A few trees, a few animals. But I saw something there I'd never seen before. I saw 15 Israelis, some of them my neighbors, and 15 Palestinians doing the strangest thing. They were talking to each other. And that doesn't happen where we come from. They're in little groups of 2 over here and 3 over here. I saw a Palestinian woman who's standing alone. She's not talking to anyone. She's in brown from head to toe, only her face is visible. She's clearly an observant Muslim. I walked up to her and I said, hello. In English, she said, hello back, and we talked. And after about a minute, I said to her, I can't believe that I'm talking to you. And she responded, I can't believe that I'm talking to you because we don't talk to Israeli settlers. I had no idea why she said she doesn't talk to Israeli settlers. In any case, she was still talking to me, so it was fine. So I thought. After about a minute or two, her son walked over, and she introduced me. She said his name is Yazin, and he's 17 years old. Yazin and I shook hands, and immediately as we begin to talk, I see he's wearing a windbreaker, and on the jacket are 3 words, seeds of peace. Anyone know what Seeds of Peace is? Wow, no one. Okay, so you're with me, because I also didn't know what Seeds of Peace is. I looked at the jacket, it says Seeds of Peace. And I looked at the young man, he's Palestinian. I remember saying to myself, this cannot be. Why would a Palestinian, wear a jacket that says peace? They're dangerous terrorists. Why? So I half-jokingly said to Yasin, what's the Seeds of Peace thing? You're just going to say, I don't know, someone gave me the jacket, or I found it on the floor. That's not what he said. He told me that Seeds of Peace is the name of a summer camp in Maine, USA. And it takes Israeli kids and Palestinian kids out of the conflict zone for a summer of recreation and reconciliation. He told me the past summer, he was there the whole summer, he had a great time, he met Israeli kids, their friends on Facebook, and he told me that he was so changed by meeting the enemy, Israeli kids, and becoming friends with them, that now he wants to spend some of his life building bridges of peace between our two peoples. And I'm listening to Yazin, and I do not know if I can believe what he's saying, because it contradicts everything that I know to be true. And you might say that Yazin's mother and Yazin himself were the first two Palestinians that began the process of unsettling me. His father was old, and her husband. Jamal's a stocky guy. He's about my size. We shake hands. And he says, where are you from? I said, I'm from Alon Shvut. Where are you from, Jamal? Beit Umar. And when he says those two words, Beit Umar, I have half of a heart attack. Because I know the city of Beit Umar. It's 23,000 Palestinians. It's about an 8-minute drive south of where I live. And I've gone on that road past Beit Umar hundreds, perhaps thousands of times. My car was stoned with my wife and kids in the car. It was frightening. I have a friend who was murdered, was gunned down on that same road right outside Beit Umar. Doctor coming home from the hospital late at night. So I know the people in Beit Umar, they're dangerous. Now it turns out I was talking to this woman and this young man, and I'm talking to Jamal. So it was a little bit challenging for me. Jamal starts telling me the events in his life that led him to be at this gathering with Israelis. He said, Hanan, you know, there's no Jews in Beit Umar. Okay. There's only us Palestinians. But there are the Jewish soldiers that guard the entrance to the city, and they make life extremely difficult and unpleasant for us. We hate those Jewish soldiers. And since they're the only Jews we know, by extension, we hate all Jews. There's no one in Beit Umar who would like to have a conversation, interaction with a Jew. But he said that many years ago, he had a Palestinian friend from the city of Jericho. And his friend said, Jamal, why don't you come to me? I go once a month to these dialogue sessions between Israelis and Palestinians. Join me. You'll enjoy it. And Jamal told me, I told my friend, I'll never, ever go with you. That's only for the weak people and the traitors. A proud Palestinian doesn't go to meet the enemy. But this friend kept trying to convince him month after month, and eventually Jamal said, okay, I'll come. And he went with his friend. They sat in a circle in a room in Jericho. And Jamal said, there was about 15 Israelis, 15 Palestinians, perhaps a little bit more. And I, Jamal, didn't participate. I sat in the corner. I listened to them a little bit. And at one point, one of the Israeli men, Jewish men, got up and looked at me, Jamal said. I was really afraid what's going to happen. He started walking towards me. I was very uptight, very apprehensive. He came right up to me and forced me to shake his hand. And he asked me questions. I had to have a conversation with him. I had no choice. When the guy finally walked away, Jamal said, I wiped the sweat off my brow. I ran to the bathroom to wash the filth off my hand from touching a Jew, and I vowed never to come back to this person's place. Jamal went home and told his wife, and she agreed. He made a big mistake by going there. What has to happen now, she said, is never go back and never tell anyone in Beit Umar that you were there. But Jamal's friend had other plans. And I really don't know, Jamal didn't explain to me how it happened, but the next month, Jamal and his wife were in that room in Jericho. And the month after, and the month after, and the month after, and Jamal said that he became part of this group because where he thought there was only an enemy, he discovered a human being who turned out to be a partner, and that changed me, he said. So I'm listening to Jamal tell me this story, and I'm falling apart. How can it be? I just remember that sense of looking at Jamal. He's a Palestinian. He's talking about becoming a peace activist. This really, really challenged me to the core. He told me another story. He said, Hanan, you know, there's lots of little kids in Beit Duma, okay? 5 years old, 7 years old. When they see someone who looks like you, Hanan, they start to cry, he said. He said, why do they start to cry? And he did not understand why I don't understand. He got a little bit frustrated. You don't get it? I said, no, I don't get it. He said, it's the kippah you have in your head. It's the fear. Those things hang from your pants. Because so many people who walk into Beit Duma dressed like you, they take their submachine guns and they kill the kids. So I thought that was borderline anti-Semitism. What I have to do is tell them, look, we don't do things like that. You're crazy. You're making it up. But I caught myself. I didn't say that. Because a light bulb went off in my mind, and I realized this is a moment of blessing. Because for the first time in my life, I'm experiencing how the other experiences me. And that could be a blessing if I'm able to hold it, to process it. So I'm holding myself back. I'm just trying to absorb this, and I'm looking at Jamal. It's uncomfortable. I don't know what to say. And I have this vision in my mind's eye of my 2 grown sons and my son-in-law with their children and their wives walking in the fields around my home. And the 3 young Jewish fathers are all carrying pistols, like all the other Jewish young men. And it suddenly dawned on me, and I never thought about this before, that those guns must be frightening to little Palestinian kids. And I said to Jamal, finally, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. And he looked at me as if I'm crazy. He said, what are you talking about? You're not afraid of us because we're afraid of you. It was extremely confusing. Like my world is coming apart. They're afraid of us. What are they afraid of? We're peace-loving people. Later that afternoon, that became evening, we sat in a circle, 15 and 15, Israelis and Palestinians, and Ali Abu Awad. I just remembered I forgot to show the film. Ali Abu Awad, the owner of the land we were convening on, and the Palestinian convener of the get-together, Ali gets up to talk. And in perfect Hebrew, that it turns out he learned from a number of years in Israeli jail, he begins to tell us the story of his family's life. And he said, I'm from a proud Palestinian family. For generations, the family lived in Kubeba, and I said to myself, what's Kubeba? Never heard of it. Then he said in 1947, 48, there was the war between the Jews and the Arabs. The Jews forced us out and later turned Kubeba into Lachish. And I said to myself, I know where Lachish is. It's on the way from my area to Ashdod, towards the sea. And he said the whole clan, part of the clan came to Beit Duma in the West Bank. They lived from 1948 to 1967 under Jordanian occupation. And then 1967, again, the war, the 6-Day War, we Jews call the 6-Day War, and we find ourselves since then, he said, living under the rigors, the suffering, the difficulties of the Israeli occupation. Ali continues to talk, but my mind is stuck in those 2 words, Israeli occupation. Because never in my life had I met a human being who used those 2 words in my presence. I had heard on the radio, I read in the newspaper, the United Nations, the European Union, is always condemning the Israeli occupation. But I never really could imagine where is there such a thing. Because when I drive on the roads of Samaria, when I walk in the fields of Judea, I don't see occupation. I see the return of the Jewish people to our ancient homeland after 2,000 years of exile. What could be more righteous than that? Where's this Israeli occupation thing? What is Ali accusing me of? Israeli occupation, that means my occupation. I don't know what you're talking about. And he tells stories of living under occupation with the lack of freedom of movement. The soldiers, Israeli soldiers, that means my soldiers, coming into his house in the middle of the night and beating up his mother, taking her to jail for giving out leaflets and for organizing strikes during the first Palestinian uprising, Intifada. Then he said that he was arrested by the Israeli army and thrown into jail for 10 years and never told the charges in a secret file against him. And when I get up and say, Ali, you're a liar, that can't be, we don't do things like that. But I didn't get up to say he's a liar, because he wasn't trying to convince us of anything. He was just telling the story of his life. And I went home that day extremely confused and angry and challenged and undone. And I remember literally pacing back and forth in my study, trying to figure out what I heard from Ali and Jamal and the others. And I'm getting so nauseous, I have to bend down and pick my stomach up and put it back in because everything is churning inside. I went back to the place I met Ali, Jamal, and the others, and Ali was there. We started to talk. Later, Jamal joined us, and there were other Israelis and other Palestinians. We were 3 and 3, and then 5 and 5, and 10 and 10, and 15 and 15, and 20 and 20. And what happened is that once a week, every week, until the wee hours of the night, we sat. And what we did is we told stories and we listened to stories. The Palestinians told us the stories of who they are, their history, their connection to the land, their aspirations, their suffering, their lives. And we, the Israeli Jews, told the Palestinians our history. 3,000 years of Jewish people upon this earth, 2,000 years of exile, the return to the land, the state of Israel. It was the hardest thing in the world for each side to hear the other side's stories. Because each side's story contradicts the other side's stories. We so many times wanted to get up and leave, run away. How could we listen to this nonsense any longer? And many times we felt we wanted to get up and object. You can't say that about yourself. It's wrong. You're making it up. And all the time you feel you're a traitor to listening to their stories. But we listened until it hurt, and we listened some more. It was very, very difficult. And I want to tell you that by and large, we did not engage in dialogue. Dialogue is when one person on one side talks, the other side listens and responds, debates, argues, pokes holes perhaps in the other side's claim. We didn't engage in dialogue. We listened and we went home and digested. And then we came back and we spoke. And they listened and digested. Extremely difficult. But it looks like it worked. Because tens and then hundreds and perhaps thousands of people, Israelis and Palestinians, have come through roots, and to some degree or another, they've been transformed, like Noor and I have been transformed. I want to try to summarize a little bit of what we've learned. So first of all, almost at the outset, Ali Abu Awad said, you know what you Jews think about us Palestinians is true. Yes, most Palestinians go to sleep at night dreaming that the Jews will disappear from the land tomorrow. Because most Palestinians understand that it's Palestinian land, the Jews don't belong. If we Palestinians hold on long enough, the Jews will get up and leave. Just like the French left Algeria after the Algerians fought and threw them out, we Palestinians can do the same. The Jews don't belong there, they're colonial occupiers. They'll get the message and leave. It was really hard to hear that. Extremely discouraging. But we Jews had to admit that we go to sleep at night dreaming the same dream. Except that it's the Palestinians who are certain will leave. It's our land, it's not theirs. We'll hold on long enough, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, eventually they'll get the message, they don't belong and they'll leave. But now, the Palestinians told us, we have no other place to go. And we Jews told the Palestinians, we have no other place to go. What happens when you hear the other side's stories of belonging to the land, connection to the land, and that they're not going to any other land, they don't have any other place to go? You hear the same stories from different people on that side, and they hear your stories from different people about your side's connection, and you begin to realize that no one's going anywhere. You begin to realize that you, whether Israeli or Palestinian, have been building your life upon an illusion. We all believe the other side will eventually leave and we will be here without them, but it's never going to be. And it fries your brain. It's extremely challenging. You have to re-understand the past and the present, and especially the future, in light of what you've learned, that they're here to stay, just like we were here to stay. We also learned that most Israelis and most Palestinians construct their identities upon the erasure of the other side's identity. Both sides think they can tell the other side who they are. Israelis, by and large, believe, and this is certainly true of all my neighbors, that there's no such thing as a Palestinian people. They'll say, Palestinian? No, you're kidding. You're making it up. There never was a Palestinian state. So you're just Arabs. Go back to Saudi Arabia where you came from. Why did you come to take our land? And the Palestinians say to the Israeli Jews, Jew, very good. The Quran greatly respects Judaism, but it's a religion. It's a faith. It's not a people. So what do you need land for? Go back to Russia where you came from. And both sides are certain they can tell the other side who they are. But we learned the hard way that you don't know anything about who they are. You have to listen while they tell who they are, and they will listen when you tell who you are. Here are the conclusions. Number one, there is such a thing as the Palestinian people. Corollary of number one, there's such a thing as the Jewish people. Number two, there's such a thing as the land of Palestine. Corollary of number two, there's such a thing as the land of Israel. Number three, Palestinians belong to the land of Palestine, and you guessed it, Jews belong to the land of Israel. And now the most excruciating, difficult thing of all, the borders of historical Palestine and the borders of historical Israel are the exact same borders. From the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River is historical Palestine, and from that same Mediterranean Sea to the same Jordan River is the historical land of Israel. As far as I'm concerned, these are facts of history and facts of identity, and they will not change. Which means that I have to expand my identity to understand that I belong in that land, the land of Israel, and that same land is also the land of Palestine, and the Palestinians belong there no less than I belong there. So fundamentally, what I'm talking about is recognition. Not just political recognition, but human beings recognizing the belonging and the identity of the other side, the connection to that land. It's very, very, very difficult. I'm going to conclude with 3 points. Number one, the work of Roots is exclusively in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. There are many other peace organizations that work within Israel proper to build bridges between the two sides, but very few, and perhaps no other organizations, are completely focused in the West Bank. By and large, peace organizations don't want to work in the West Bank because they see the Israelis living in the West Bank as enemies of peace. And that's, by the way most of the Jews living in the West Bank see themselves as enemies of peace. So peace movements want to get rid of them, ignore them, sweep them under the rug. In Roots we say, if they're the settlers, the Jews living in the West Bank are the heart of the problem, then you have to make them the heart of the solution. You have to talk to them, you have to bring them into the discussion, you have to help them to be Palestinians and open up their eyes to the reality, to the identity. And towards that end, we have our center, the Dignity Center between Bethlehem and Hebron. We have another local association, Israelis and Palestinians, to the south of Nablus. You see up there on the map. We have another group in the Jordan Valley. And we have scattered activists, Israelis and Palestinians, throughout the West Bank. We're focused there in the heart of the problem. That's point number one. Point number two is religion. In my opinion, it's clear that religion is part of the problem. And by religion, I'll be very specific. Judaism is part of the problem, and Islam is part of the problem. There are a number of interpretations of Judaism that are prevalent today that are making this conflict worse, that are fueling the conflict. And there are a number of interpretations on the Islamic Palestinian side that are making this conflict worse, that are fueling it. Most peace organizations say religion is part of the problem, so we'll ignore it. Hope it'll go away. But Root says if religious people are part of the problem, then bring the religious people into the solution. Our work specifically focuses, not exclusively, but specifically focuses on religious Jews and religious Muslims, bring them to the table of interfaith dialogue. Interfaith dialogue for us does not mean talking about the texts we have in common. It's talking about the difficult texts that cause us to kill each other. You have to put those texts on the table, and sometimes, not always, a process of mutual repentance occurs. I have to admit that my religion is causing a problem, certain interpretations there, and we have to find a way to understand things differently. And the same thing on the Islamic side. This is difficult stuff. But we believe in roots until we put religion on the table and take the oakets, take the thorn, we say in Hebrew, out of this conflict on its religious levels, we won't find peace. And number 3 is the following: settlements. Just like Roots recognizes that the Palestinians have a connection to the whole land from the river to the sea, Roots also recognizes, as I said, that the Jews have a connection to the whole land from the river to the sea, including the West Bank, Judea Samaria, which should mean that the Jews have a right to settle wherever they want, including where I live, in the West Bank, Judea Samaria. Yes, Jews should have that right, but not at the expense of the Palestinians. I believe that Jews should be able to settle the land, but I also believe that Palestinians should be able to settle the land. And in the present situation, my people has all the rights, and the Palestinians have no rights. That's about land, that's about water, that's about freedom of movement. The whole settlement enterprise, which in theory I support, in practice is being constructed and applied on the backs of the Palestinians. And that is just wrong. And there's a word for that. It's called occupation. Right? Jews and Palestinians can argue if the land is occupied, because many of my co-religionists say the land cannot be occupied because it's been Jewish land for 3,000 years. How can we occupy our homeland? We can argue about that. But I think there's no argument about the fact that the people are occupied. Perhaps the land is, perhaps it's not, but the people, the Palestinian people, live under Israeli military occupation. And that's immoral and it's wrong, and I don't think that it's furthering peace. So in our work, just like Palestinians become aware of, just like Israelis become aware of Palestinian identity, Israelis become aware of Palestinian identity and suffering, and they begin to see what our occupation, what my occupation is doing to them, and indeed, the vast majority of Israelis do not know, do not see, and people's eyes are being opened. You don't have to be a settler to understand the importance of our work. You don't have to be a religious Jew to understand the importance of our work, but you do, I believe, have to understand that without engaging religion and without engaging the settlers, there's not going to be peace. Final sentence. In Roots, we are, so we believe, preparing the human groundwork for a future peace settlement of dignity, of equality, freedom, human rights, and security in that little sliver of land from the river to the sea that we both call home. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight, and I hope that you are still ready for another story. I promise it won't be as long. It's the age difference and the experiences. So my name is Noor. I live in Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem, and I will tell you a little bit about myself and how I ended up joining Roots and what we are trying to accomplish. So I actually was born in Amman, Jordan, the city of Amman, Jordan, in 1991. But I have no connection to Jordan other than I was born there. My family, all of my family from both sides, are originally from the area of Jerusalem. My grandparents were born in their village in Jerusalem, in a village called Malha. The village still actually exists until today, but my family lived there, my grandparents lived there until 1948. In 1948, when the violence was raging in Palestine and the war was about to start, what we call the catastrophe that happened in 1948 and 1949, just next to our village, one of the Palestinian villages was attacked by the Jewish side, and that village is called Deir Yassin. A brutal massacre took place in Deir Yassin, and the news came to my village, so the people in my village were afraid that we are going to be next attacked after that. That's why they started to leave their village toward the refugee camp that was established just outside of Bethlehem by the United Nations. My grandparents entered in the refugee camp, and they thought this would be a matter of a short time, hopefully. This would be for a few days, a few weeks, the war will stop, and we will go back to our home, to our village. The war stopped after a year and a half. And after a year and a half, in the end of 1949, my grandparents realized they would not be able to go back to their house because their village is now on the west side of the Green Line. That became part of the state of Israel. And no Palestinian refugee is allowed to come back to what became the state of Israel. And where they live, in Bethlehem, that's part of the West Bank, is under Jordanian control or under Jordanian occupation. My parents were born in Bethlehem. They grew up their life there, they lived their life, and they grew up there actually. And after 1967, they found themselves living under the Israeli occupation. And at some point, my father, he felt so frustrated and hopeless that it cannot have a normal life. And that's why he decided to leave. His plan was not to go to Jordan, actually. His plan was to go even further. He wanted to go to Europe. But for some reasons, he stayed in Amman. My mother also stayed there with him. They got married there, actually, in Jordan. And that's how I was born there. In 1995, something different happened in this story. Because in 1995, we are in the middle now of the Oslo peace process. And for the first time in the history of this conflict, after several decades of fights and wars, now the Israeli leadership and the Palestinian leadership are engaged in peace talks. They are talking about ending the occupation in the West Bank and Gaza, and soon there will be a Palestinian state there. That actually gave my parents and my family a lot of hope. Based on that hope, they say that's the moment for us to go back because finally we can live our normal life in our country without the fear of occupation and just have a normal life. That's why my parents actually moved back from Jordan to Bethlehem in the West Bank. I was only 4 years old when my family decided to go back. So I was only 4 years old when I came to Palestine. And actually, when I try to go back and remember how was it? How it felt for me, how it felt actually for me, how was the situation. Living in Bethlehem in 1995, 1996, it was actually a different time. I have a few good memories. I remember when my father used to work in Jerusalem. And you know what? He used to drive his car to Jerusalem. That's something that I can't do today. There's no way that I would be able to drive my car from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. I remember us as a family, because I'm coming from a Muslim background, every Friday we go to pray in Jerusalem. We go to pray in Al-Aqsa every month. And we also take a trip to Jaffa, to go to the sea, to go to the beach. So that's what I remember. But I'm not saying to you that in those 5 years, between 1995 and 2000, the whole situation was just so peaceful that the conflict is gone and the occupation ended. No, I was too young to understand the complexity. Of course, there was violence and there were many other things happening. The peace process that was supposed to bring us to Palestinian state and independence, it did not. It failed in the year 2000 and it failed miserably. With the occupation and with the tension that existed on the ground, that left the people in the region with a huge amount of frustration. People were so frustrated. And that frustration and anger turned into the second intifada, the second Palestinian uprising against the Israeli occupation as a result of the failure of the peace process. Now, the intifada was a very violent time. Immediately, things actually became more violent than it was. This is the time when the Israeli military at some point besieged the city of Bethlehem. Hamas was sending the bomb suiciding attacks into Israel. My father was still working in Jerusalem and the buses are blowing up. The Israelis are coming to assassinate some Palestinian leaders and Palestinian militant groups. Palestinian security forces and Israeli army are actually fighting against each other. Bethlehem was besieged for more than a month. So that was the time when I, as a teenager, started to open my eyes on the reality around me and look around, and I was old enough to understand that I'm living in a war zone. I'm living in this conflict zone. And I was old enough to understand that, this is not a normal life. No one should be living this way, under curfews and fights and, worried for your life. And you know what? When I think more about it, I felt very unlucky. I felt some of that I have this curse because of who I am and where I live. Because I was born as a Palestinian, and I do live on the land of Palestine. I have to endure all of this and to deal with this situation. And it's like a curse that has been going on with my family from 70 years, right? From my grandparents who lost their home and became refugees, and my parents who were born as refugees. And now I'm like the third generation of this story of suffering, as if this is my destiny. This is what's decided for me. And I was so angry. I'm talking about when I was at the age of 15 years old. I'm so angry that this is the reality that I have to live. And I thought about it and I said, there is nothing I can do. And maybe the most rational thing to do is to get out of there, run away, go somewhere else, start a new life, far away from all of this misery. Why do you need to live under these circumstances? Just have a normal life somewhere else. That's what I wanted to do, to be honest with you. But that was not the only idea in my mind. Because when I go back to ask myself the question, what should I do? I'm not satisfied with the answer that there is nothing I can do. And I say to myself, if everyone thought to just give up and run away, then who's going to do anything to make sure that the future generations are not going to live under the same situation, meaning that they are going to have even a worse situation. So I feel that if I run away from there, I'm also abandoning a certain responsibility. And I feel this way because at that age, when I was 15 and 16 years old, yes, I'm angry at the situation. I'm angry because of what's happening around me. And I can blame many sides about the situation. I can blame the Israelis for what they did to us and what they are doing to us. I can also blame my side. I can blame maybe the leadership. I can blame the older generations. I can say it's their fault. But I have to admit at the end that this is the situation that we have to deal with. It's not perfect, but I have to do something about it. And when I say we, I'm not just talking about my people, about my side. I'm talking about my generation specifically. That's what I'm talking about. Now, if you are a Palestinian living in the West Bank, enduring all of this, living under these circumstances, and you think about it, and you think about what do you want to do, the first thing that doesn't take a long time to realize, to understand that the number one reason that makes our life so complicated there and takes away our national rights and sometimes our basic human rights is the fact of occupation, the fact that we are living under control of another nation and we cannot choose for ourselves, we cannot be free on our land. So that should end. It's so clear to every Palestinian that the occupation must end. But then how do you end it? How do you do it? You resist. That's what I tell myself. And this is not a unique situation that we are only living as Palestinian people on our land. There are many other nations through the history who were oppressed and occupied by other nations. They fought against that oppression. They resisted. And when I say I want to resist the occupation and I want to fight against it, I literally mean it. I need to go out and fight in the most effective way, even if that meant violence. And even if that meant for me to resist the occupation, that I might lose my life at some point in this violent resistance to the occupation. But I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to pay my life as the price of the freedom and dignity of my people and the future generations. And that, not just a theoretical debate I'm having with myself when I was a teenager. That's the reality outside. Because people my age were actually going out, trying to do something, throwing rocks at Israeli soldiers, or being part of attacks and being killed, or sometimes even defending their families from their lands being confiscated and going out and protest and demonstrations. So that's my reality. That's my background. That's the situation around me. That's where I live. I want to share with you another story, how I found about roots. Of course, growing up in the West Bank and living that life, it's not just only about the conflict and about the occupation. At some point, because I live in Bethlehem, I'm blessed for that, I think, that, so many internationals, so many tourists, and specifically so many Christian pilgrims come to visit the city where I live. And after they visit Jerusalem, they come to Bethlehem, and that gives me the chance to meet a lot of internationals, people from different nationalities, different backgrounds, who probably have heard the Israeli side of the story. They hear the Israeli perspective. They landed in Tel Aviv, they have the Israeli guide at some point, they hear the Israeli part or the Israeli perspective on the conflict, and they never had the chance to hear from a Palestinian one. And that's when they come to Bethlehem, they actually sometimes meet with me, and that gives me the chance to explain the Palestinian side of the story. And one thing led to another. I became a tour guide where I live. I work mostly in the West Bank. but I can't work in Jerusalem because of the movement restrictions, for example, that we mentioned, and other restrictions. I can't guide anywhere I want in the country, only in the West Bank area. So mostly in Bethlehem where I live. And one day, I was asked to take a group of American students, university students, who were coming from mostly political science background. And they were part of this program that focuses on the Middle East, on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And what they do on the program, they come for about 10 days to the region, and they actually travel and meet with people and meet with sometimes officials from the governments on both sides. Sometimes they meet with the representatives of the civil society. And it is mostly that on the first week, actually, what they do is that they spend it more on the Israeli side. They have the Israeli guide, they go and do meetings on the Israeli side. And on the second week, or the second part of their trip, they come to the West Bank to do the same thing. Now, I'm asked to take them for one day, to be with them for one day, and I asked to take them to the city of Hebron in the south. So I said yes. I took the group. We started in the morning, the early morning in Bethlehem, and we drove together from Bethlehem to Hebron. And after we actually left Area A, the city of Bethlehem, we are now driving in Area C in the West Bank toward Hebron. And that's where you see all of the checkpoints, the Israeli soldiers, you see the settlements are being built. And I'm, of course, talking on the way about these things. They are asking questions. I'm talking about how the occupation functions on their basis, the new facts on the ground that they are seeing, two-state solution, what's happening with that. The group asking me questions. We actually arrived to Hebron. I take them in the old city. I talk about the situation in the old city of Hebron. And at some point, we had a lunch was arranged for the group at a Palestinian family house. They hosted us for lunch, and they also talked about their life living in Hebron, and about soldiers coming in at night and searching their house and doing a lot of troubles for them and settlers attacking. So by the end of the day, we can say that my group had learned more about the reality of the Palestinians. What does it mean to them under occupation? How it actually feels like, and what is this experience? Before we finish our day and our tour and go back to Bethlehem, we still have one more meeting, one last meeting in Hebron. And that meeting was with an Israeli settler. Now, actually, that was very rare to me. That almost didn't happen before. That I was asked by a group to bring them to a meeting with an Israeli, let alone with an Israeli settler. I wasn't against it. I said, this is what the group wants, this is what they asked for, so I have to do it as my job to bring them to the meeting. But of course, now I ask myself, how can we do it? Because, of course, when they want to meet with the settler, this meeting will take place inside one of the settlements, and I cannot enter with them. So I thought eventually what we are going to do is that I will come to the checkpoint at the entrance of the settlement where the soldiers are, and then I will hand over the group to the speaker, and they will go in for about an hour or an hour and a half. I will have to wait them outside because we will go back to Bethlehem together. There are some Palestinian shops there, and I will wait at one of these shops. And after the group come back, we go back to Bethlehem. But he, the settler, the Israeli speaker, he suggested actually that I should join and I should listen to the things that he would say. And now me and him and the group are starting to think and look for a place where all can we sit together in the whole city of Hebron, because there is no such place. Eventually, he actually suggested that we go to the tomb of the patriarchs, to the Ibrahim Mosque, a very important place there. But that place is also divided between a Muslim and a Jewish section. It's controlled by the Israeli military, and there is a checkpoint in the middle where I, as a Palestinian, cannot cross and go to the Jewish section. And he, of course, as an Israeli, cannot come to the Muslim and Palestinian section. But he said, listen, I will walk in front of you. The soldiers who are there, I know them. Don't worry. You walk actually in the middle, because I have some like 40 people with me. They will not see you. It will be fine. We did it, and that's how I actually crossed the checkpoint the first time there to the Jewish side. Now, we are there. It was my first time and the only time. We are there. We're sitting at the tomb of the patriarchs at the Ibrahim Mosque from the Jewish side, and he is about to talk to my group. Now, this settler, I won't say his name, he actually began to tell us his story, who he is and what he's doing here, in a way for the group to understand the settler's perspective on the conflict. Now, he began by telling us that he was born here in the US, and he grew up as an American Jewish citizen with a very good life, according to him. His life was actually very good here. He did not suffer from anything that made him leave his life here. He didn't say that it was because of anti-Semitism or anything like that, but he made sure to explain to us that despite he had a good life in the US, here in the United States, it wasn't enough for him to fulfill his Jewish identity. That meant that he needed to travel and go all the way there to the Holy Land and live in the Holy Land. Now I'm sitting with American kids, with a group, listening to this settler, and in my mind, I'm listening to this American person who's telling me that he left his country and thousands of miles away he traveled to come to my land because this is his land. That's what he did. So I'm listening to him, and then he continues to speak. He says two things actually that he based his story on. Two major beliefs that he based his entire presentation and story on. The first thing he said, there is no occupation. There is no such thing. It can't be, because we or the Jewish people are returning to our homeland, and our existence, our presence on our land cannot be considered illegal. And I'm listening to him and I'm like, what? In my mind, and this was the first time ever in my life that I hear someone denying the occupation. It never happened before. What do you mean? This is not a matter of a personal perspective that what do you think about the occupation? It's actually a legal fact. It's a political fact that we live under Israeli army control. We are not citizens of a state of Palestine that doesn't exist because of the occupation. You guys control our borders and airspace and the land. So how do you say there is no occupation? How could he say such thing? Of course, I didn't stop him. I didn't interrupt him. But in my mind, he's talking, and I'm not able to listen and understand how can he say these words. And then the second thing he said that was actually less shocking to me, because I heard it before. He said there is no Palestinian people. There is no Palestinian people. And now the group is a bit confused. If there are no Palestinians, if there is no occupation, then why there is a conflict? They of course ask him. And his answer is that there is no Palestinians. The Palestinians are just Arabs. They have Arabic countries they can go to. They have 22 countries they can go to. And I was born in Jordan, and I'm not a Jordanian citizen. And what he's talking about. But of course, I say that I wasn't shocked by him saying that, because I grew up understanding that the other side, the Zionist Jews, from the beginning of the conflict, have denied our existence. Not only our rights, they denied our existence. They said to the Jews in Europe, a land without people for a people without land, in the 19th century, and made it look like that there was no one on the land, but we were there on the land. We lived for hundreds of years and for thousands of years, we lived on the land. After listening to him, to be honest with you, I was very, very frustrated and angry, but more importantly, I felt being so denied. The more I listened to him, I felt like I don't exist, because all of these circumstances that I live under and my identity is not being recognized by him. I felt like as if I'm transparent, like I'm not there, I don't exist. I'm not in the presence. And I remember that he said something about something was happening at that time that wasn't accurate, and we started to talk about it and we argued, and then I took the group and we left on our way back to Bethlehem. On the bus, I was thinking about this encounter, and I just realized that this Israeli settler was the first Israeli that I ever met in my life. How could it be that only at that age, only then, just 8 years ago, I met my first Israeli? Because all of the Israelis that I met before were Israeli soldiers. Not just people, they were soldiers who stood us at the checkpoint, who asked for the ID, who come to Bethlehem to conduct arrests. And with these people, you don't talk, you don't have a conversation. So that's how I meet Israelis most of the time, as soldiers. And he was an Israeli civilian. That's the first time that I actually had a conversation with a civilian. And of course, I understand he's a settler and he's actually bringing this radical perspective, and that's what the group also is interested to understand. But I was so upset that I told myself I met my first Israeli and the last one. I don't want to meet anyone of them again. On the way back to Bethlehem, we actually still have one more thing to do, and that is to stop patriots. Roots, Shorashim, Judur, the same organization that I'm part of today, and I needed to bring my group there. Now, I thought that the reason for meeting Rabbi Hanan was just to meet another settler, and the group wanted to meet another settler and hear from the settler's perspective. I was thinking it's just about that, but it turned out that there is something more. I took my phone, I called Saeed, one of my co-workers from Bethlehem, and I asked him, Saeed, tell me what's happening? What's this whole thing? I don't get it. Aren't we going to meet with a settler? And he said, yes. I was like, why are us Palestinians? Who's Ali? And he said, like, listen, this is a project where Palestinians and settlers are sitting together. And I was like, okay, what they are doing? And he said, they are talking about peace. That sounded like the most dangerous, ridiculous, and suspicious thing that I can hear in my context and my reality. What do you mean that there are people from my side, sitting with settlers talking about peace? It sounded so negative, and I was so upset to hear that from him that I needed to bring the group there. And I wanted to go now, not because I wanted to meet with the Israelis or with the Israeli at this moment. I wanted to meet with those Palestinians who are sitting with settlers talking about peace. To make a long story short, we arrived, Ali was not there, only Rabbi Hanan was there actually. He welcomed us in this center in Merkaz Karama, and we sat there and he began to talk. And I cannot actually deny that at the beginning when I was listening to him, explaining to us about his identity, mentioning those three pillars that his identity stands on, as a Jewish person, as a Zionist, as a settler, it became more and more difficult to me. I'm sitting there, and I'm telling myself what I'm listening to, why I'm even still sitting here. I need to stand up and leave, because there's nothing that talks about the reality of what's happening to us, what happened to my people, and I didn't want to listen anymore. And you know what? There was a bus driver with us. He's waiting us outside. I said I should go just, join him. But I didn't do that. I didn't leave, even though it was so hard and so difficult to listen, for a number of reasons. One of those reasons, and I think it's the most important, I was telling myself, maybe Rabbi Hanan will say something about the reality of what's actually happening, and not just all these stories about the history of the 2,000-year connection and all of that. And then Rabbi Hanan, like he did tonight, he began sharing with us all of these stories about himself realizing that there's another people here on the land, that the land has another name, that there's another story happening at the same time, that the other people are living under different circumstances, that there's occupation, and there was a catastrophe in 1948. By the end of his talk, the group was so confused. Because that's not how they were expecting the settler to speak. It was really very confusing for them. But I remember leaving the meeting with Rabbi Hanan that day, and unlike the denial that I felt just a few hours before, I felt recognition and empathy. What do I mean by I felt recognition and empathy? I felt that through listening to Rabbi Hanan's story, that he was able to recognize me, to recognize us, to recognize my story, my connection. And he took even a step further and was able to empathize with that story, with that connection. And of course, it was very inspiring and very challenging at the same time, because we are enemies. How could he do that, I asked myself. And I'm thinking about all of the stories that he told. And then we talked over the phone, and he actually came very close to Bethlehem. We met again, we talked, I listened, and then I went to Roots. I met with other people there, with other activists, and after a few days, I found myself joining this. And now I want to tell you why I am at Roots. In the middle of my story, I was telling you about the challenge, about the dilemma that I live, about how can I serve my people, how can I change the situation here, how can I make sure that the future will be better than the present. What to do? So many people talk about resistance, and at the same community there is a movement that happened in the last 15 years of people talking about nonviolent resistance and the importance of nonviolence. We also have violent resistance that's still going on and creating so many things. But for me, Roots was part of the answer, because what happens at Roots is that we found partners on the other side. Both sides can say that we have partners on the other side who together co-resist this reality and work for creating a better future for both people. It's not about one side, it's about a vision that includes both sides. And that's how I see myself, and that's what I see myself and see us actually doing at Roots. I joined Roots because for me, it's a way to change the reality and to create a better future for all of the people on the land. And that's my story. So thank you for listening. And I think we want to show the video.
Yeah, let's show both videos. This is the trailer of a movie that was made about our work in the first 2 years, 8 years ago. That's Aliyah Bouad.
נמצאים כאן באדמה של המשפחה שלי. כשבאתי מכאן והחלטתי להקים מרכז פלסטיני שלי אלימות. אני מצפה שיתקפו אותי גם בחברה שלי וגם באוכלוסייה של המתנחלים. אבל אני יודע, כל עוד שאנחנו לא מדברים עם הימין, השמאל לא יעשה שם.
The first time I had heard someone talk about being in Israeli jail, someone talking about suffering under occupation.
We believe that religion has to be part of the solution.
Allahu Akbar. Adonai הוא האלוהים.
יהודים ניצודים בארץ ישראל כמו חיות, ממש. פשוט צדים אותם. רואים רכב, איפה הם? איפה השותף? איפה הרב?
אתה יושב על הכלכלה שלי, אתה יושב על הבית שלי, אתה יושב על הלב שלי, אבל לא כשותף.
האם אתה מוכן להודות שהישיבה שלך פה היא ישיבה של פשע? וממילא תגיד לי מבחינה פוליטית.
The Jewish people that we own this land, we don't own this land. We belong to this land. The Palestinian people also belong to this land.
אנחנו האחרונים בעולם שצריך לשבת אחד עם השני. באתי לבקש לדרוש את המחללים. מפני שאת ואני סבלנו שלא חיפשנו את זה לפני.
And the next video is only 6 years old.
See, is this?
Yeah, that's it.
مرحبا، اسمي خالد أبو عواد من قرية بيت رمان فلسطين.
שלום, אני הדסה פרומן, מתקוע, אשתו של הרב מנחם פרומן, זיכרונו לברכה. My name is Nadine, I'm from Bethlehem.
Shalom, my name is Shaul, I live in Takawa.
Hi, I'm Bilal, I'm from Bethlehem.
My name is Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, and I live in Landshut.
4 years ago, here in our family land, Roots start. Roots is a partnership between people from both sides. People who believe in non-violence, dignity and equality between our people. Dignity for me is when you respect the other one, when you give him the space for his life, when you respect his opinion, his culture. This is the dignity. And it's very important for us, the Middle East people. We try here to give another picture to the people in order to increase the hope inside them.
We work in many different directions, but one of the core things that happens here is the people-to-people work.
Nobody could imagine a space where Israeli and Palestinian youth from the West Bank could meet each other and work together and building a better future. This cannot happen without friendship, without love for each other, and to have fun together.
All my life, before I come to youth group, I only went once to Israel or to beach. It was very emotional to go with each other because I never imagined that I would go to beach with Israelis, you know.
All these programs engage with the local communities. People who were afraid to come and came for the first time and then saw something that surprised them and became involved.
אנחנו פה עומדים כולנו בכאב גדול, והשאלה איך גורמים לזה שזה לא יהיה עוד פעם ולא נעמוד פה באותו בכי.
So it was so important when Rose went to Rizzion Junction, you know, to protest against the violence in Duma. Both Palestinians and Israelis should condemn violence and should stand with each other against violence and should show the people, the world, and also the extremists on both sides that there are Palestinians who are against violence and they are protesting and they are saying no violence in my name, and also Israelis who are saying the same thing.
We expand our circles in many ways. I travel and speak all over Israel, in the radio, in the television, and a lot of meeting with young people. People are thirsty to hear what we are doing. They don't believe the dream of peace can become free.
Roots Network today includes representatives from 28 different Israeli and Palestinian towns in this area, this local area.
Roots has created a miracle, an expanding island of sanity, a veritable Garden of Eden, in a land full with so much ignorance of the other, prejudice, stereotypes, and fear. We are beginning to bring a little bit of healing, deep recognition of the other's belonging to this land, preparing the ground for future coexistence, human rights, dignity, and mutual recognition. We need your help. We ask you to join us and join the thousands of people around the globe who are supporting Roots. Instead of exporting the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to the four corners of the globe, help us to export recognition and respect. Thank you very much. Next slide. In 1 minute, we can open up the floor to. Okay. In 1 minute, we can open up the floor to questions, perhaps some answers. And in that 1 minute, I'll just show you the QR code. If you want to join our mailing list, we send out something not more than once a month, newsletter about the work on the ground. There's also pages over there to sign up your name and your email address. Should we pass them around? No, why don't we pass around the pieces of paper? Sure. Anyone who wants to join can use the QR code, give us manually your email and your name, and we can begin now to see if anyone would like to ask us. Who would you like to smoke?
We have some time for some questions, so I'll be glad to hand off a microphone to anyone who wants to start.
I guess I'd begin by just asking, in the middle of all that has been transpiring since October the 7th, with the work that you continue to try to do for each of you, what is your hope for the future, short term, long term?
Very often, I think when I look at the bigger picture, I don't feel so much hopeful. It doesn't really bring me hope. But what brought me hope for the last 3-4 months is to see our activists are still engaging in helping each other, Israelis and Palestinians. We were working for the last 3-4 months to support the families, many Roots families, and also not just necessarily part of Roots, but also close to us, people we hear about them, to help them in a very, very difficult time where many people lost their jobs and even had to leave their homes and live in another place, in a different place. And in the last 3 months, some of our activists were engaged in really helping each other to try to reduce the violence in our area and to try to de-escalate violence. And that actually what gives me hope. When I look at the bigger picture, my hope comes from that before the 7th of October, the work that we were doing was very important, and the work of the grassroots was very important, but we needed also work on the political level. Without a political environment that supports our work, it's hard to continue. And right now, after the 7th of October, it's even more difficult. So I think and I hope that there are more governments who are involved in our situation are realizing the necessity of a political process that will lead into an agreement between the two nations. Because in such an environment, I think it will be for us easier to accomplish our goals. And that's what I hope for.
I don't know, but I assume you're talking also about a political solution. So briefly, I'll say that Roots is working towards a political solution that recognizes, of course, both sides' historical connection to the whole land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, and grants both sides, as I said in my talk, dignity, equality, freedom, human rights, security. That's as far as Roots goes. We don't put on the table a specific political plan. There are some in Roots who are in favor of a one-state solution, others in favor of a two-state solution. And Noor and I are part of a political movement that's not Roots, but is connected to Roots. And that political movement is called A Land for All, A Land for All. And they put on the table a political plan, a specific plan, that's called Two States, One Homeland. And this political plan comes to, I would say, solve the paradox. The paradox that, on the one hand, both Israelis and Palestinians want sovereignty. They want their own country. They want their identity expressed politically. The state of Israel is what the Jews want, and it's a Jewish state, and the Palestinians want a Palestinian state. But on the other hand, both sides want the whole land. And both sides not just want it, but they're deeply connected to the whole land. So how do you square that circle? Give both sides their sovereignty and also give both sides the whole land. And believe it or not, there's an answer. The answer is the plan put forth by the Land for All movement. The answer is a confederation, which means a state of Palestine and a state of Israel. Israel being within the borders that you saw on the map of Israel proper, the state of Palestine being within the West Bank. That gives each side its sovereignty. That's the classic two-state solution. But you have to add into that, so the movement says, a Land for All movement, the confederation that connects the two states together. Because in a confederation, like the European Union, you have your own state, you have your own sovereignty, the Israeli flag, the Palestinian flag, but you're also not just a citizen of your own separate state, Israel, Palestine, you're also a citizen of the confederation, which means your citizenship symbolizes the connection to the whole land. Not only the one you have sovereignty over, but the other side's sovereignty, you're also part of that through the citizenship of the confederation. And practically, what does that look like? It looks like, number one, open borders like we have today between Germany and France, or Switzerland and France in the European Union. And it means open residency, which means not only can you, as a French person, travel to Germany. You could also live in Germany as a French person. So according to the Confederation approach on the table, you can be an Israeli citizen, travel to visit Palestine, and also live your whole life in Palestine without having to get Palestinian citizenship. You'll be an Israeli citizen voting in Israeli national elections and a Palestinian resident voting in Palestinian local elections. And the same thing with Palestinians. You can be a Palestinian born in Ramallah, or born in Israel, or born in South Carolina, come home, get citizenship in Palestine, and then go move in Israel and live in Israel your whole life with Palestinian citizenship and Israeli residency. And then, of course, you also have, after the open borders and the open residence, you have the organs of confederation. There's a president of the confederation, and there's a parliament like we have today, the Parliament of the European Union. And all of this actually squares the circle. The Land for All movement, Noor is more active than I am, is, let's see, two things about it. Number one, from their perspective, the Land for All movement, roots is creating the human groundwork to allow their political movement to flourish. And from our perspective in Roots, they are giving a political outlet, a political horizon to the people-to-people work that we do in Roots. That's number one. Number two, indeed, they are working to meet, and they're succeeding in meeting politicians from both sides and also politicians from around the world to spread the word of the possibility of a two-state solution with the Confederation.
Other questions?
Just curious, when you return home, you'll have to fly through Jordan, I assume, correct?
Yes, if I go back home from the US, I would have to go through Jordan. In the last couple of years, because at Roots, we have done a lot of work, so Roots have done a lot of effort actually to secure permissions. As we saw in the video, like when our youth program are going to trip, they go to the sea together. So all the time, sometimes we are working about the permissions. So
Want to explain exactly what it is?
So any Palestinian in the West Bank to move or to go to Jerusalem or to Israel in general, they need to have a permission from the Israeli military in the West Bank, since the Israeli military is the ruling power and they are controlling the checkpoints and controlling the movement. Now, one of the most actually hard to get permissions is to get for a Palestinian a permission to travel from Tel Aviv, to fly from Tel Aviv. And so in the last few years, Roots was working hard every time we travel to apply permission for me, and it's a long process. It takes months, several weeks and months, and sometimes the first application gets rejected, and then the second, you apply second time. So that was before the war, and it wasn't so easy to get a permission. Now this time with the war, it was like really impossible to get a permission to fly from Tel Aviv. So I have to go through Jordan. Now, when I say I go through Jordan, when I cross to Jordan from the West Bank, I still cross the border that's controlled by the Israelis. So, and it's a long process to cross the border because you have to go through the Palestinian Authority check, Israeli check, and then arrive at the Jordanian side. And so that's how I travel.
It's time for a couple more.
You can ask us about anything. We say
the guide part. When I went to Israel in 1972 with a group of Pentecostal faith healers, and our guide in Jerusalem where we stayed was a Palestinian who took us all around Israel. And you're saying that now that's no longer possible, right? Because I remember there were a lot of Palestinians living in Jerusalem at that time.
Yes, there are. So one possibility it could be that this guide was actually a Palestinian that lives in Jerusalem. Now, in the West Bank, you can say there are two types of Palestinian citizens. The 90% of the Palestinians living in the West Bank, like in Bethlehem or Ramallah or Jericho or any other city in the West Bank, are living today under the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli military law. So we are citizens of the Palestinian Authority, but we are still under the military law. In East Jerusalem, it's a little bit different because Israel annexed East Jerusalem, meaning it considered East Jerusalem as part of the state of Israel. And so far, most nations did not agree with this step of the annexation. But there were some things that happened in the last couple of years actually that, for example, like when the US moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, that was understood from the Palestinian side and the international community as a way of recognizing Israel's sovereignty over Jerusalem, but the US said, no, we still think that the borders of Jerusalem should be determined in a negotiations between both sides. So there's about 300,000 Palestinians who live in Jerusalem, who have Jerusalem, what we call residency status.
Okay.
They have a Jerusalem ID card, so they live under Israeli law. They are not citizens of the state of Israel, though. They don't have the right to vote in the Knesset, in the elections, but they do have the right to vote in the city. And many of them don't vote in the city because they don't want to normalize the fact that Israel is occupying East Jerusalem. And when I say East Jerusalem, I'm talking about the old city, I'm talking about Mount of Olives, I'm talking about all of these neighborhoods that you see and Israeli settlements in that area. So it could be that this guy that you're talking about is from East Jerusalem, so it's much easier for him to travel all around the country than me. And there is another category of Palestinians, just to clarify, there are Palestinians who are citizens of the state of Israel, who have full citizenship. Those are the Palestinians who stayed in 1948, weren't forced out, they stayed on their lands. If you go to Nazareth, for example, if you go to Haifa, a lot of the Palestinians who are living there, they have been living there, and in 1948 they managed to stay and not leave, and they became citizens of the state of Israel. They are part of the Palestinian people, but they are citizens of Israel. But that's another issue to talk about also, being a Palestinian and citizen of the state of Israel, while at the same time there's a conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, that puts you also in a very sometimes difficult place.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for just one more question.
If there's another one.
Looks like it might be your turn.
As I listen to the thoughts about the two-state, one, plus a confederation, one homeland solution, in light of what's going on presently and thinking about the generational impacts of such violence, would you each be able to just reflect briefly about what your wonderings are about how long it might be before that you can dream a dream like that and have it be possible?
Sure. Before this war started, before the 7th of October, when we were talking about the solution, to most people it sounded like a faraway dream, and we are far away from actually getting there. Whenever I tell my Palestinian friends or neighbors or people I meet that I work with a group of Israelis who believe that we should have two states, but the two states also are part of one confederation where they have open borders and freedom of residency and everyone can live anywhere and preserve rights for both sides, most people were saying this is a great idea, it's a nice idea, but really do you think the other side will accept it? And so that feeling existed before the war. For sure, the situation now is even more difficult. More people actually think that it's hard for them to imagine it. It's hard for them to even hear about like a work of peace, while at the same time the war is going and they are under an attack, and the situation in Gaza, the people are being killed in Gaza this way. It's hard for most people to listen and to accept this. But I will say something. Even in the last 3-4 months, it was difficult to actually even to imagine to bring a group of Palestinians and Israelis to a room and have dialogue and use our programs. It felt to me it's much easier actually to talk about not to talk about what's happening now, but to talk about the future. When I was talking to people about like plans for the future and about a shared vision, I saw that more people actually, it was much easier to gather people around. If I brought two people, Israeli and Palestinian, to discuss the war, because there's a genocide, there's no genocide, and then it turns into a fight, an argument, it will not really help. But when people actually talk about the future, there is possibility. But definitely, the amount of fear and trauma and radicalization that we are dealing with now is bigger than ever. That's why I say that it's important right now. We can't continue the work we are doing without having a serious political process. Because yes, the people are traumatized, are afraid, But that doesn't mean that we can just sit and watch the situation and the conflict developing, because it definitely will get from bad to worse. That's the time where the governments and politicians have to step in, but in a good way, which is, in my opinion, it happens very rarely in the world of politics and actually in the world. But this is like a historic moment where I believe to say enough is enough. We have to have an agreement between the both people. It doesn't have to be, by the way, the confederation that we mentioned. If we started by two-state solution and then later we develop the trust and we develop the recognition between the people, and we can get there one day, but we have to start somewhere. We can't just accept the current situation and say we can't do anything. I have some hope because in the last few days, the American Biden administration was talking about some serious discussion among some of the Arab countries in the region about putting on the table like a plan, but there is nothing really official, so I have to be very careful with this hope. There is nothing really official. We have yet to see how there will be also resistance against it from the Israeli side, from the current Israeli government, because I don't believe personally, as Noor, of course, I don't believe that the current Israeli government and leadership in Israel wants peace, or we can work with them. And also there is a problem on the Palestinian side. We have divided leadership, we have Hamas in Gaza, and we have a Palestinian leadership with all of its problems. And we need also a united Palestinian leadership, a unified Palestinian leadership that really represents the people. And those are also obstacles that we have to deal with them on the political level. So I hope that what's going to happen next, and I hope there will be a chance for success.
But before the rabbi answers, could I ask one follow-up to that?
Yeah.
Is there I know that Mahmoud Abbas is very, very old. Is there a Palestinian figure who could potentially in the future have the credibility to step into the vacuum of leadership? Because I think you need a Palestinian leader that has the trust of the people in order to move forward too.
The answer, yes, there are. And but the issue is there was always leaders who are actually ready to lead the Palestinian people. The problem is that, and now I'm saying my personal opinion, and we are getting to the political side mostly of the situation, is that Israel, part of keeping the occupation in the West Bank, was also making sure the Palestinians being divided and have no stronger leader to lead them. It's not a secret. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, have said it a few times, but he did say it recently that a unified Palestinian leadership is something that he doesn't want, that he doesn't. So there is an Israeli influence. There is also another, like the Arab countries who are involved and have effect on the region, and also Iran have contributed to that by either not supporting the Palestinian reconciliation, and when I say reconciliation, I mean between political parties, between Hamas and Fatah, to create unified Palestinian leadership, or supporting one side or the other. Right? Iran supports Hamas, and in a way that strengthened the political division that happens in the Palestinian society. And I'm talking now about other countries because they have part in what's happening. The American government basically did not care in the last few years. They did not. Under Trump, it was mostly like, okay, encouraging Israel and working with Israel to have this agreement with other Arab nations in the region. And mostly it was in the case of, it happened for several reasons, but one of it was also to create this alliance against Iran. This is front against Iran and Iranian proxy troops in the region. That all affected the Palestinian situation and we don't have a democratic, we are not living in a democratic atmosphere. And even though I mentioned several times to say we are citizens of the same authority, but so many times I say it, we are not living as citizens in a country who are building a country. We are living in a state of, even before that, we are living in a state of people who think about occupation and fighting with occupation. And we are not thinking so much about building a country right now. We're thinking about how to end the occupation. That's how the Palestinian people function. So the answer, yes, surely there are leaders, but the atmosphere wasn't allowing them to rise and to take leadership. I think that That might change in the next few months, and we will see something. And for sure, there are people working to.
Looks like I get the last word. In answer to the question, I will say something that's very, very similar to Noor. And I'm repeating it only because I want to end with a message of hope. So on the one hand, Israeli society was extremely traumatized by October 7th. The whole country is in a state of mourning and of circling the wagons of deep tribal emotions that we have to defend ourselves against the Holocaust of October 7th, and I don't use that word lightly. And over 90% of Israelis are saying that the discussions in the international community of a two-state solution are delusional now. We'll never, ever, ever give up on our control over the whole land from the river to the sea in light of what Hamas did. The whole world should see, Israelis are saying, that there can never be a two-state solution with Hamas's terrorism. And the Israeli Knesset just a few days ago took a decision of like 80% agreed that there'll never be a Palestinian state. And with all that, on the other hand, we do see the discussions in the international community, and there are hints that a grand plan is developing that the United States, the European Union will put on the table diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and other Arab states that don't have diplomatic relations with Israel, and there'll be a two-state solution, Palestinian state, and there'll be other carrots to Israel to accept this. And there may also be sticks. And I personally believe that there have to be sticks. And it may be that when the present Israeli government is defeated in the next election, and almost everyone agrees in Israel it's going to be defeated, there's going to be a new government, and it may be run by Yair Lapid or by Gantz. It just may be that if a grand plan is put on the table by the European Union, United States, including lots of carrots and lots of sticks for Israel and prodding Israel, it could be that that new government would take the risk. And to me, that's very hopeful. It's only a possibility. It's not certain at all. And under those circumstances, roots will be front and center. Because when such a plan is put on the table, our constituency, our Jewish constituency, is going to resist it fiercely. And then it'll be the responsibility of Roots to get the message out that this is possible, and this is something that we as Jews and Israelis should accept, because we must recognize Palestinian identity, Palestinian humanity, Palestinian identity, and that the Palestinians have to get a minimum of their needs answered for us Israelis, to get a minimum of our needs answered. So there is hope. Let's put on the last slides as we close, right? We're closing, right? We're closing? What can you do? I'm happy you asked that question. So instead of me reading, we have 5 slides of what you can do. That's it. Take pictures. Those who are interested, of course. Take pictures of the slides. We're still on the first slide, right? Yeah, so you see our website, friendsofroots.net. We want everyone, we urge you, we hope you will go to the website and learn about us, friendsofroots.net. And there's a lot of important information there. On Facebook, we're Friends of Roots. On LinkedIn, on Instagram, we are Roots_Israel-Palestine. Also on LinkedIn, as you can see. Of course, we ask you to donate money. Without the contributions of Americans, the work would not continue, as it says there on the slide. Invite us to speak in more churches and synagogues and mosques and universities. That's also one of the ways we meet our budget. We'll go to the next slide. We also do Zoom presentations, as you can see. My personal website is rabhanan.org, and there are things that are more edgier than on the Roots website. There are things that we can't put on the institutional website. You notice that the American Friends of Roots Board, we have a nonprofit in America, 501c3, that has a board of at this point, about 10 Jews and Christians. There's unfortunately no Muslims there yet. We're still working on it. So there's some Christians in the room. There are businessmen or businesswomen, people with connection to money, to influence, people with knowledge of law or public relations, or just nonprofit management. We're always looking for new members of our board. They meet once a month by Zoom and once a year. They have an in-person meeting for one day. Let's go to the next slide. We have a campus affiliate. If you want to, last night we spoke to the College of Charleston, and some people said they might take upon themselves to bring the campus affiliate group to the College of Charleston. It's called the Tidna, which is a combination of Hebrew and Arabic. It means our future. We're now at the University of Texas at Austin, and we're at UPenn, and we are at Harvard, and hopefully there will be additional chapters. You can go, I guess, to the next slide. Yeah, it's all there. If you want to take a picture, you can. Of course, what we're talking about here, among other things, is taking the insights of Roots and the tools that perhaps we gave you and applying them to relationships between conservatives and liberals in America, or Democrats and Republicans, or Jews and Christians and Muslims. I don't know if there's another slide. I don't remember. Let's see.
Thank you.
So give me one more minute. If you came here tonight as a strong supporter of Israel, we hope you'll leave as a strong supporter of Israel. And if you came here tonight as a strong supporter of Palestine, we hope you leave as a strong supporter of Palestine. You have to support both sides. Because if the Palestinians don't get what they need, want, and deserve, Israel will not get what it needs, wants, and deserves. And if Israel doesn't get what it needs, wants, and deserves, the Palestinians won't get what they need, want, and deserve. And therefore, the final message is pro-Israel, pro-Palestine. That's the only way to be pro a better future for both sides. Good evening.
Wow, thank you.
We'll have some parting words from Bishop Ruth.
Well, again, I just want to say thank you. And when you spoke about the challenges now, each of you really gave us a charge, which was and is, if we focus on the conflict in the Middle East, my poor paraphrase of what you each expressed, we get nowhere, right? And I'm not speaking of understanding, I'm speaking of focusing on what we sometimes do here. Isn't it awful? We can't really speak about it and we go home. But if we focus on what's possible, which is what you have been doing and are doing, then there is hope. And you are an icon of that for us. So I think we have a charge that we're leaving with. And I'm always reminded daily as bishop that part of my charge is to hold up unity, which doesn't mean placating. It doesn't mean denying two truths. It means understanding them. So that's our charge. And we have lots of ways to support Roots. Again, I think they are an icon of what we need to be about, what we need to be about as Christians and as Episcopalians. So thank you, and I urge you to take the charge out. Good evening.